Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am just Mike, and you are watching, you are listening to episode 7 of the Rock Out Wild Show. And tonight's featured main attraction is a review of well, not actually a review, but a reaction. Exactly what I mean. Reaction to a old movie review of mine called Neighbors. I don't know if I'll do one or two for time, but we will see as this episode rolls around. Also, I will be covering stuff as per usual on this day. This is January 23rd, 2025, as I am recording this episode right now. And I will be doing, again, like I said, the usual stuff you normally see on a Rock On Wild show called On This Day, January 23rd, 2025, in music, television, wrestling, as well as music. And for the first topic that I have for you all, you saw it at the on the title of this very video of episode 7 of the Rock On Wild show. My favorite bands that start with each letter from the alphabet from A to Z. So, how are you all doing? Hope you're all doing well. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. Like the video, share this video with all your friends and your family. If you know someone who likes a variety of stuff like movies, music, television, wrestling, share this with all the people that you know. So, and of course, as for the area that I'm living in right now, we're in a little bit of a middle of a polar vortex. I can't stand those two words, but yeah, it is cold. It is freezing this morning. It was minus 25 with the wind chill. All I gotta say is yikes. So, with that little icebreaker out of the way, let's get into the first main topic, and that is my favorite bands that start with each letter from the alphabet from A to Z. And you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different for this. I'm going to put up some visualizers so you can follow along. So, with that being said, the first band I'm going to talk about that begins with the letter A. Well, so we're going to start off at A. And before I get started with this, I have scoured the internet and Googled a lot of websites of bands that begin with the letter A all the way down to Z, or should I say Z, because I am Canadian. And so I've done a lot of research going into this topic. And this is something that I done a while ago. I made a post on it on Facebook. So this is for the people that really don't have me on Facebook. And if you do have me on Facebook, you'll probably see that this list will be a little bit familiar. But to those who don't, let's go along this journey. As I take a sip of my water. So as for the letter A, it is Alter Bridge. Alter Bridge consists of Miles Kennedy, Mark Tremonti, Brian Marshall, and Scott Phillips. 3 of those guys are in a band called Creed. So my experience, and as I go into every band on this list, I'll share like some sort of, what I'll do is do some sort of like experience with this band type of thing. Not necessarily maybe going over their accolades or their songs because there's too many, and their albums because there's so many. I'm just going to tell you what I know off by hand. A lot of this is off the cuff. This is not a scripted show at all. unless you're looking at On This Day and stuff like that. So right now, let's talk about this band, Alter Bridge. My experience with Alter Bridge is pretty interesting because when I first heard of Alter Bridge, uh, it was probably around 2005 when the WWE was using Metal Angus as Edge's theme song, and I had no idea who this band was when Edge was coming out using the song. I had no idea until maybe about a couple of years later. I started digging into this band and what they're all about, and then I discovered that 3 of the 4 members of this band are in Creed, and Maz Kennedy, a tremendous singer, who used to be in a band called the Mayfield 4, and now he has joined the Creed guys, forming a band called Alter Bridge, and I absolutely love them. It's rock, it's heavy. Sometimes they get into metal, but it's just simply music, and I can go on and on about how great Maz Kennedy is. Open Your Eyes is a song that really introduced me into the world of Alter Bridge. And then it just went on from there. The rest is history. I bought their first 2 albums, put them on my iPod, and pretty much just listened to them during college, during my college years, because when I discovered them, there were 2 albums in. So I just binged the heck out of this band, and I couldn't get enough. Absolutely couldn't get enough of Alter Bridge. And I still listen to them to this day. They're still going on. And as of right now in 2025, from what I'm hearing, that they are starting to get back into the studio to work on a new album. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter A, Alter Bridge. Now, for the letter B. The band that I have chosen for the letter B. Now, I could have went either way with this. It could have been this band. It could have been that band. It could have been one of these. One really came close, but I chose to go in a different direction. This should be no surprise to anyone who knows who I like in terms of bands and stuff like that. So, from my favorite band that begins with the letter B, it is Breaking Benjamin. My experience with Breaking Benjamin, now I have a game that I used to play a lot called WWE Day of Reckoning, and a couple of their songs were on that game, and I had no idea who Breaking Benjamin was. They had Polyramus and Firefly on there. No, I'm not referring to the show. I'm referring to a song called Firefly by Breaking Benjamin. And so I had no idea who they were at the time when I was playing this game, and then I was listening to a couple of their songs. So I just went about it, but I just knew them. So if I recognized them and if I see who actually done these songs, I would know. But I didn't go in depth back in 2005 and 6 yet, mainly because I didn't have access to the internet yet. But once I got access to the internet, I started looking into what were these songs and who done them. And I still had no idea until it was roughly around 2015 when I decided to get into the band. They were coming out with an album called Dusk Before Dawn. It had songs like Angels Fall, Failure, and those were just a couple of the singles. Angels Fall was another. And yeah, so I just started listening to this band pretty much close to every day. And then once I started diving into their older albums, I found out that Breaking Benjamin had done those two songs, Polyramus and Firefly, and that blew my mind. So, and this is a band that I still listen to this day. They just came out with a song called Awaken, and it's my favorite song today. It is currently my number one favorite song on the Make Rock Top 10 Songs of the Week. So I've been listening to them for a good 10 years now. This is the 10th year I've been listening to Breaking Benjamin. So that is my favorite band that starts with the letter B. Now, let's go into the letter C. And that band, my favorite band that begins with the letter C, is a band that I saw live yesterday. Yesterday? No, right. Last year, I mean, not yesterday. Write that one down. My favorite band that begins with the letter C is Creed. Now, I originally had another band at the letter C, but I decided to make a last minute change and go with Creed, and that was a easy decision to make because this band has been with me since 1997 when I first heard My Own Prison. In fact, the first time I heard My Own Prison was on Much Music when I watched the video of it. Did not know who this band was before then, and I was like, okay, cool new band. All right, let's go. And then they came out with stuff like What's This Life For? And they had a song called One. Their first album was already out or starting to come out way back when. But it wasn't until Higher came out where I really took note. In fact, I think a lot of more people took note more when Higher came out because they were growing in popularity, and popular is an understatement with Creed. You got Scott Stapp, Scott Phillips, Mark Tremonti, and Brian Marshall, and I talked about them just not too long ago with Alter Bridge. So, yeah, this band has been with me for a good number of decades now. And I saw them live last year, and what a fantastic concert it was. And we really don't need to go into all the songs that they do because everybody knows them. We don't need to go into all the albums, mainly because there's not very many albums and everybody knows them. It's just one of those bands where a lot of people know them. They're probably one of the more popular bands on this list, next to maybe a few more that I'll get into. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter C. That is Creed. Now let's go on with the letter D. And my favorite band that begins with the letter D is Disturbed. The Vengeful One of my favorite songs by Disturbed. Yeah, fantastic band. I really don't have much to say in the way of Disturbed other than their remake of The Sound of Silence is one of the best remakes you will ever hear. And that's all I have to say. This is a band that kind of came and went with me over the years. I think I first heard them when they came out with Down with the Sickness, but I never really got into them. Not until around the 2010s decade when The Vengeful One came out and The Light came out. So I was getting into their newer stuff a little bit more. And then I started digging into the past and listening to some of their old albums. So that's pretty much that. And like I said, my favorite song by Disturbed is The Vengeful One. It's from their album Immortalized. And That's where the remake of The Sound of Silence was. And the funny thing is that when I first heard The Sound of Silence, it was on the album, and the song didn't blow up yet. And I was thinking in my head, this is not their song, is it? Because this sounds like something else, someone else done. And I was right. It was a Simon Garfunkel song, and I can't praise how great that cover is. It's one of the best. In fact, I want to do a list in the future talking about my favorite cover songs of all time. So, D for Disturbed. Let's go into the letter E. And my favorite band that begins with the letter E is a symphonic metal band. Our first symphonic metal band of this list. And that band is Epica. My experience with listening to Epica is this. I discovered them when I was going through the whole symphonic metal phase with all the other symphonic metal bands like Within Temptation, Camelot, Nightwish, Leaves Eyes. So Epica, that's the easy answer for E. I could have went with Evanescence. I could have went with them, but Epica to me stands out just a little bit more. They have a little bit more in their repertoire, and they're still going strong. To me, this is the band that's holding the fort down when it comes to the symphonic metal genre. And their albums are tremendous. They're tremendous. And I think my favorite song by Epica is The Divine Conspiracy, which is also the song of the album of the same name. And of course, you got Chasing the Dragon, Never Enough, Blake Infinity, Consigned to Oblivion is another one. Facade of Reality. I can go on and on about Epica, but that's pretty much where I stand. My favorite band that begins with the letter E, Epica. Now let's go to F. And this is where it's going to take a little bit of an interesting turn, because the band I am about to talk about is no longer active. And I decided to not necessarily change this because why would I want to? Why would I want to? So with that being said, my favorite band that begins with the letter F is False Memories. Now, you may not know who this band is, but they are a gothic metal band that only has maybe about 2 or 3 albums at best. But their last couple of albums are excellent, especially The Last Night of Fall, where you got songs like Rain of Souls and Voices. That album is just tremendous. So if you haven't heard of them, give them a shot, because I find them incredibly underrated, extremely underrated. And it's a darn shame that the band's no longer active anymore. It's a darn shame, but I do want to give them a special shout out. So that's my favorite band that begins with the letter F, False Memories. Now let's go to G. My favorite band that begins with the letter G is Greta Van Fleet. If you're living under a rock, what are you doing? Greta Van Fleet, yeah, that's my favorite band that begins with the letter G. When I first heard Greta Van Fleet, it was on a station called 97.7 Hits FM, and the radio host said, coming up is a band that sounds a little bit like Led Zeppelin. And I was like, okay, this got my attention. So I heard the song. It was called Highway Tune, and it just popped. It just stood out to me. I was like, wow, I like this. I love this. And then I seeked out the song again on YouTube, see if there's a music video. And what really drew me in and was really surprising was like these are only kids playing musical instruments and singing. That it was even more impressive. So yeah, I like the old Greta Van Fleet, their first couple of albums, that first long EP, and then they came out with an album after that with When the Curtain Falls and Love or Leave and all those songs. That was Greta Van Fleet at their best. Their album Starcatcher is okay, but it's nothing from that pops to me. It's a little bit more vibey whereas their early stuff, it's a lot more catchy. That's where I stand with Greta Van Fleet, but they are my favorite band that begins with the letter G. Now let's go on to H. And my favorite band that begins with the letter H is 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you got that reference, you know the song that I'm referring to. My favorite band that begins with the letter H is Halestorm. Lzzy Hale, RJ Hale, their brothers, sister. Lzzy is the singer. RJ is the drummer. And what a fantastic group. What a fantastic group. I started listening to Halestorm probably around, I want to say it was 2015-ish, or maybe a little bit before then. Maybe 2014, somewhere around there. And I think it was just by chance. I was looking through Facebook and one of my friends posted one of those songs, and I think it might have been the song that I was referring to. And when I first heard it, I was hooked. Lzzy is a tremendous singer. RJ is a fantastic drummer. And the band is just great all around. And if I had to pick one song by Halestorm that's my favorite, it has to be Familiar Taste of Poison. What a tremendous piece of work. Now, they have a lot of great songs. Here's to Us. Their song Here's to Us is like an anthem. They just have so many great songs. And I Am the Fire is another standout as well. That is my favorite band that begins with the letter H. Now, let's go on to the letter I. My favorite band that begins with the letter I is a band called Illumashade. Illumashade, a bit of an interesting pick. Bands that begin with the letter I is a little odd. So it was kind of hard, almost hard to pick one. But I settled with Illumashade, another underrated band that has some good stuff. Seek them out on YouTube. They have a great slow ballad called Rise. That is tremendous. Seek them out. They're a little bit more along the lines of pretty much like elegant metal. If that's a way to describe metal, it's elegant metal. So that's my favorite band that begins with the letter I. When it comes to the letter J, my favorite band that begins with the letter J. Ooh. Well, this should be no surprise because like some of the other ones before that you saw, this is one of my favorites. So, without further ado, my favorite band that begins with the letter J are the ones, the onlys, the metal icons. J for Judas Priest. And I really don't need to say a single word other than waiting for lightning to strike. When I first got into Judas Priest, I knew about songs like Living After Midnight and maybe one or two others, but I never really got into Judas Priest until Firepower came out. I think that was roughly around 2017-ish when the song I was just singing, Lightning Strike, and he had a couple of other great tunes on there as well. That was pretty much the first album, Judas Priest album I've listened to. I haven't listened to their old albums, but that's something I do want to get into as well. What can I say about Judas Priest that hasn't already been said by others? They're the metal gods. If you had to pick a Mount Rushmore of metal bands, Judas Priest should be on there, no question. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter J. Now with the letter K. My favorite band that begins with the letter K is definitely not that. It is Killswitch Engage. This is a band that I started listening to probably around 2016 or 17-ish. Yeah, 2016 when Hate by Design started coming out. And the funny thing is that I knew of the band before then, like mainly by association with wrestling, the WWE, because CM Punk used one of their songs, "The Fire Burns," as an entrance theme before he used Living Color's Cult of Personality. So I knew of the band, but I never really got into them until Hate by Design came out in 2016, and the rest is history. I listened to that album Incarnate when it came out, and then the albums that came out after that. Then I started getting into their past stuff with Howard Jones when he was the singer. And of course, with Killswitch Engage comes, you see the people online chatting it up, debating whether if Howard Jones or Jesse Leach, who's better. I get it. I understand it. There's no need to compare the two because they're both great in their own right. Howard Jones is a fantastic singer. Jesse Leach, I think, is probably one of the more underrated voices in metal. So there ends the debate, and there ends my discussion of my favorite band that begins with the letter K, Killswitch Engage. Now let's get on with the letter L. And my favorite band that begins with the letter L is, drumroll, because it's a big one. And I talked about Judas Priest earlier being like a Mount Rushmore metal. When it comes to the letter L of my favorite bands that begin with each letter, my favorite of the letter L, I think, is a band that should be on the Mount Rushmore of rock bands in general. That is Led Zeppelin. I'm just going to leave that up there and let that sink in. Yeah, so Led Zeppelin. What can you say that hasn't been said already? Legendary, iconic, Stairway to Heaven, Black Dog, The Ocean, Whole Lot of Love, When the Levee Breaks, are just some of the songs that I love by the band. And Robert Plant, his voice is otherworldly. John Bonham's drumming, just beyond the years of a lot of drummers now. And often imitated, they're duplicated. Again, I can't say things that haven't been said about Led Zeppelin because it's just one of those bands that you just take it in. You listen to Led Zeppelin and you just take in how legendary and how fantastic they sound. And of course, they done a song for Well, it actually wasn't 4 because it came out decades ago, but Thor Ragnarok used one of those songs as like the unofficial theme song of Thor Ragnarok. Welcome to the Land of the Ice and Snow and stuff like that. Yeah, you get the rest. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter L, Led Zeppelin. I don't need to go any further because it's just not much to say when you have a band that is so legendary that you're kind of at a loss for words and you're speechless because of how much that band has influenced your life. And that's what Led Zeppelin did for me. Now it's on to the letter M. And my favorite band that begins with the letter M is a band that came out in the 90s. A band with the lead singer's name is Rob Thomas. And that band is Matchbox 20. Matchbox 20, my favorite band that begins with the letter M. And when I started listening to Matchbox 20, Push came out, and it was one of my favorite songs of the 90s. And I got the album, Yourself or Someone Like You, put that on repeat. Their second album came out with songs like Bent, put that on repeat. And their third album is pretty good too, but those first two albums are the albums that really stand out when it comes to Matchbox 20. They are my favorite band of the 90s. They're one of my favorite rock bands of the 90s. And they're just one of my favorite bands of all time, period. If only their last album was just as good as their first two albums. That's all I have to say about that. So, when it comes to the letter N, this is a no-brainer because it's not only this is a band I've seen live, I consider my band, my favorite band that begins with the letter N, to be my favorite band of all time. That band is Nonpoint. When I first discovered Nonpoint, they done a song called "In the Air Tonight," and it was off of the Miami Vice soundtrack. And it's also a cover song of the well-known Phil Collins tune of the same name. And it's one of my favorite cover songs of all time. It's up there with a lot of them. And what makes Nonpoint my favorite band that begins with the letter N and my favorite band of all time? Well, it's just consistency. When they first started, they were always like heavy. They were always experimenting with their sound. And as each album goes along, they evolve their sound, whether it's for experimental or just even just getting heavier by each album. And their album X, you can't get more heavier than when they came out with X. Yeah, what can I say? Bullet with a Name. It's pretty much an anthem for Nonpoint, and it's my favorite Nonpoint song of all time. Heck, I could do an entire list ranking every Nonpoint song there is. This is the band that I started listening to roughly around 2007, and I'm still listening to them to this day. And you know a band is fantastic when you still listen to them consistently each and every single year, every other week, every other month. As time goes by and as day goes by, this will be the one band that I will always go to. It's just one of those things where you feel attached to a band, and you love them, and you grow with them. Again, as time goes on, it's just one of those bands that will always stick with me no matter what. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter N. That is Nonpoint. My favorite band that begins with the letter O is another one of my favorite bands that came out in the 90s, by the way. That band is Our Lady Peace. When I first heard Our Lady Peace, I do believe Superman is Dead came out. I think it was roughly around 1996 or 7. Or it could be a little bit earlier, I'm not sure, but it was roughly around then. Yeah, and then they just became a staple for me for the 90s. Like Matchbox 20, Our Lady Peace would be up there as being one of my top rock bands of the 90s. Songs like Clumsy, Somewhere Out There, Starseed, just to name a few, they're all fantastic. It's just an all-around fantastic band. I mean, this is a band, when you hear them, you know it's them because of the guys singing and the way they present themselves. When you watch one of their videos, and yeah, one of my favorite times was the 90s, and Our Lady Peace was one of those bands that came out in the 90s that really stands the test of time, in my opinion. Now let's get into the letter P. And my favorite band that begins with the letter P is a band called The Pretty Reckless. Lead singer Taylor Momsen, and yeah, The Pretty Reckless. So my experience listening to The Pretty Reckless, I think I started getting into them roughly around 2012 or 2013. I saw one of my friends post the video for Going to Hell, which is not available anymore because YouTube is sensitive. But yeah, I first got into them roughly around that time, about 12, 13 years ago, and the rest is history. When I really got into them, it was roughly around 2014 or 15. Probably when Take Me Down came out. And they were coming out with the album Who Are You Selling For? And then a few years ago, they came out with Death by Rock and Roll. And So It Went is a great song. 25 is a good one. And even some of their older stuff. I still listen to both the early 2010s Pretty Reckless and the 2020 Pretty Reckless. So no matter what year it is, the Pretty Reckless still delivers the goods, in my opinion. They still deliver the goods. And Taylor Momsen, easily one of my favorite singers of all time as well. Now let's get into the letter Q. My favorite band that begins with the letter Q, this is a no-brainer as well. But when I looked up bands that begin with the letter Q, I saw a few that I sort of recognized, but one really stood out to me, and it's the clear winner here. My favorite band that begins with the letter Q is Queen. Another one bites the dust, and that's all I have to say. Freddie Mercury, tremendous. The whole band, tremendous. Bohemian Rhapsody, fantastic. A masterpiece. One of the best songs of all time. One of the best rock songs of all time. And I do not need to say anything more than that. Oh, and watch their Live Aid concert. It is tremendous. So that's my favorite band that begins with the letter Q. Now let's get into the letter R. And my favorite band that begins with the letter R is Red Hot Chili Peppers. Anthony Kiedis, Flea, Chad Smith, couple of guitar players as well that came and went. But they are my favorite band that begins with the letter R. Case in point, the song Under the Bridge, one of my favorite songs of the 90s. And the rest is history. A band that has evolved over the years, and they're still sort of going somewhat strong. And I got a couple of their albums. They're pretty good. Californication, one of my favorites, and probably one of my favorite music videos as well. Yeah, what more can I say than what other people haven't said about Red Hot Chili Peppers? Their sound is fantastic. They're one of a kind, and just simply one of the best. Simply one of the best. Well, let's go on to the letter S. And my favorite band that begins with the letter S is a bit of an underrated band, but they're slowly starting to get the recognition that they deserve. That band is Sevendust. This is a band that I saw live with Nonpoint when Nonpoint opened up for Sevendust, and I absolutely love Sevendust to death. The June Witherspoon, Morgan Rose. I was starting to get into some of their albums a few years ago. I started getting into them a good number of years ago as well. Yeah, I really can't think of anything more to say about Sevendust because I'm almost starting to go a little bit too long with this. So let's go on to the letter T. So again, my favorite band my favorite band that starts with the letter S is Sevendust. When it comes to the letter T, my favorite band that begins with the letter T is Trivium. When Alex Bent got into the fold, the band just got better by then. Before then, so when I started getting into Trivium, it was roughly around 2016-ish, or even maybe a little bit before then, 2015, when Silence in the Snow came out, and Until the World Goes Cold. And then Alex Bent came in 2016 with Sin and the Sentence, and the rest is history. I love the song Catastrophe, and really a lot of the stuff with Alex Bent. Now, when I was listening to them going back and listening to some of their older albums, I'm not going to lie, it's a little weird because Alex Bent just put Trivium on just another level that can't be duplicated. So that is my favorite band that begins with the letter T, the metal band, the metalcore band, Trivium. When it comes to the letter U is a little bit tricky. But I settled with the band called Unleash the Archers. When I got into Unleash the Archers, their song Tonight We Ride came out, and I was hooked ever since. And the only songs and albums that I actually listened to by Unleash the Archers were the ones that came out after Tonight We Ride came out. So that's pretty much that, and that's pretty much my favorite band that begins with the letter U. Not really much to talk about there. When it comes to the letter V, no, it's not the Veronicas. No, it's not Voltaire. Really, when it comes to this list, I'm just doing bands, like rock bands or any other genre band, but just like groups of people, like 3 or 4 people. So my favorite band that begins with the letter V is Volbeat. When I first got into the band Volbeat, it was roughly around 2016 when The Devil's Bleeding Brown came out. And the way I would describe Volbeat is that they are the rock, they're metal with Johnny Cash and Elvis thrown in the mix. And sometimes rockabilly as well. It's really an interesting mesh gelling together of music. If you haven't checked them out, go check them out. And when it comes to Volbeat, I like their early stuff more than their later stuff. But that, again, is just a taste in music. And hopefully when Volbeat comes back with an album, hopefully this year they will go back to those old roots of just simply rock, just going all out. So that's my favorite band that begins with the letter V. There were only 4 more bands left. There are really 4 more bands left here. So when it comes to the letter W, my favorite band that begins with the letter W is Within Temptation. When I discovered Within Temptation, it was roughly around 2008. They're a symphonic metal band. And they have tremendous songs like Deceiver of Fools, Restless, It's the Fear, The Howling, What Have You Done? And those were the songs that I started, like when I first listened to Within Temptation, those were the songs that I listed off that I first listened to. And the rest is history. I started getting into their albums. Their album Enter, tremendous, very underrated album. Really, their first few albums are really, really good. They started to fall off the symphonic metal rails a little bit, but they're on the experimental phase now, and they're not really symphonic metal anymore. But again, it's just one of those things where you look at their old stuff and you see that this is the Within Temptation that used to be great. Now they're still pretty good. I mean, their last album that came out was actually better than Hydra, which I would consider the worst Within Temptation album. So there is that. So yeah, but Within Temptation is just an important band for me growing up. College life mainly back in 2008 when I was just on the symphonic metal binge. That was the one band that I went to. Within Temptation, my favorite band that begins with the letter W. When it comes to the letter X, this is another symphonic metal band. And this is a band that I saw live with Camelot and Battle Beast, and that band is Xandria. When I first discovered them, again, it was with the bands that I listed off earlier, all these symphonic metal bands. So I don't need to go any further than that, other than this is the band that it's hard to keep a lead singer first go off. I mean, they went through a bunch of singers. But now that they are revamped and reborn, no pun intended, I think they are off to the races, and I think they are pretty much safe for now. So yeah, when I got into Xandria, started listening to their albums and songs, I think my favorite one has to be Ravenheart. And yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. Go check out Xandria if you haven't done so yet. So that's my favorite band that begins with the letter X. And there's only a couple more. My favorite band that begins with the letter Y is Yours Truly. They're pretty much like pop rock sort of thing. They're kind of like Taylor Swift or only heavier. I started getting into yours truly maybe about a few years ago when Circles came out, and really just sporadically just checked out some of their songs. And I started getting into their last couple of albums and their album Toxic that came out last year. I thought it was an underrated gem. So that's pretty much that. And that's pretty much almost it. So all right. And my favorite band that begins with the letter Z. This is a no-brainer. It is ZZ Top. Legs. How. Yeah. I really don't need to go any further. Other than ZZ Top is a tremendous rock band. Go check them out if you haven't done so yet. And that's pretty much all I have. And so that is my topic of my favorite band of each letter of the alphabet. And I think because I really went overtime, I will only do one more thing. Instead of doing on this day in music, TV shows, and wrestling, I will react to a movie review of mine because this is something I'm going to feature on every single episode. So what I'm going to do is open up the camera and share screen. All right, I'm looking at this one. I got to. All right. I didn't, for one thing, I did not expect to go this long. That topic, uh, I really dragged out that topic, I think. But I done all right. I try to present that as much as I can without having a script there and just going all improv. So what I'm going to do is share screen, Neighbors. So this is a review for a movie called Neighbors that came out about 10 years ago, starring Seth Rogen. Let's get into this thing. Let's dive into it. Thought there would be an airbag in there. So Neighbors is a movie about a couple and a newborn baby who are being forced to live with bad neighbors, to say the very least. Well, basically, the synopsis is that these people have to live their lives with a fraternity next door. Imagine the possibilities. And in this movie, it stars Seth Rogen, who's pretty much Seth Rogen in every single movie that he's in. Rose Byrne plays his wife, who he is in way out of his league. Oh my God, she is gorgeous. And also Zac Efron as the leader of the fraternity as the neighbors next door. And I thought overall this was actually a really good comedy. Very few nitpicks about it. So with that out of the way, this was a very fun and entertaining comedy to say the least. There were a lot of funny moments in this movie. A lot. I'm not going to spoil anything, so I'm just going to leave it at that in case if you do go watch it, go watch it. And to me, when I look at this movie,
You know, you can almost interpret this in two ways. You can either walk out of this movie saying, "Oh my God, this was really funny. This was hysterical. This was great." On the other hand, you could probably say this movie did not uh, laugh at all. I didn't laugh at it at all. This wasn't good. This was a bad comedy. They overused everything. This was too vulgar. This, that, over the top, blah, blah, blah. I can understand that. But to me, when I look at this movie, there are a lot of things they could do in this movie and get away with it. You can suspend your belief for
With
a large
disbelief.
amount of time while you're watching this movie because a lot of things in this movie that happen really don't happen in real life, and it was funny as hell. Like I said, I won't spoil anything. Rose Byrne and Seth Rogen, their chemistry with each other was absolutely outstanding. The way they bounced back and forth, the chemistry with Seth Rogen and Zac Efron in this movie was great. I love Zac Efron in this movie. He could
Oh,
be a douche when he wants to. He could be a nice guy when he wants to.
speaking of Zac Efron, I should note this. I watched Iron Claw not too long ago. Easily his best movie he's ever done, I think. Well, from what I've seen.
And he's a guy that really doesn't know what he wants to do in his future. And here you have Seth Rogen, who has realized that his life is pretty much over and it's fizzling out a little. So, in a sense, you know, these two kind of feel the same way with each other with their lives, but in different aspects to it. So, with that being said, this made for great chemistry between these two characters. And so there's great chemistry all around with this movie. The way the comedy is used was absolutely fun. I love how they use the shenanigans that take place and just make them over the top. It was really great to watch. And like I said, the acting from both Rose Byrne and Zac Efron were really, really good. And to me, Rose Byrne was the show stealer. I have seen her in past movies like Insidious 1 and 2, as well as X Men. And I really didn't think much of it. But with this movie, to me, she was the standout star. She was the standout comedian in this movie. She nailed it. There was one scene in particular where she really milked it,
Milked it.
and it was funny as hell. I almost almost couldn't watch. It was that funny. So overall, like I said, this was fun, entertaining, exciting, hilarious to watch. 77 points out of 100, an easy 77. And if you saw this movie, feel free to comment below and tell me what did you think about it. And also, with that being said, you can hit that subscribe button down below this video to get Mig Rocks.
So that was pretty much my reaction to the movie called Neighbors. And I thought I reacted to that before, but I don't know if I did. No, I didn't. Yeah, I've done a reaction to Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yeah. All right, perfect. Now, I said that I was going to skip doing on this day and just go straight to the reaction. But I didn't say I wasn't going to do it, so let's do it. Let's go. I said I was going to do this at the beginning of this episode of the Rock Out Loud show, so let's get into this. And I'll go over this rather a little bit quickly. So let's look at on this day in wrestling. Let's go present, because there is some there that did pop out on me. Share screen, and let's look at January 23rd, 2025, on this day in wrestling. And this is the one that really stood out to me. And today, back in 1984, Hulkamania Brother was born as Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden to win his first WWF Championship. He will hold the belt for over 4 years. That record still hasn't been broken, by the way. Back in 1995, on Monday Night Raw, the Smoking Guns defeated the 1-2-3 Kid and Bob Holly to win back the WWF Tag Team Championships. In 1996, Clash of the Champions 32 took place at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. The main event saw Nature Boy, Ric Flair, and the Giant defeated Hulk Hogan and that's a bad impression, and Macho Man Randy Savage. In the year 2000, the WWE Royal Rumble took place at Madison Square Garden, with The Rock winning the main event in Rumble match. Triple H defeated Cactus Jack to retain the WWE title in a street fight, and Chris Jericho was declared the sole Intercontinental Champion after a triple threat win over fellow co-champion Chyna and Hardcore Holly. The Hardy Boys also defeated the Dudley Boys in WWE's first ever tables match, and this event was also the first WWE pay-per-view to even air on terrestrial television in the UK when it was broadcast on Channel 4. In other first, Taz made a victorious WWE debut as the mystery opponent for Kurt Angle. The loss was Angle's first in his professional wrestling career, and that was back in the year 2000, 25 years ago today. Let's look at today in TV movies, and I'll share a few here. In 1951, third Emmy Awards, Alan Young Show, Alan Young and Greta Thunberg win. In 1955, KOKR, now KVBC, TV Channel 3 in Las Vegas, Nevada's first broadcast. In 1961, U.S. Supreme Court rules cities and states have the right to censor films. In 1962, film Jules et Jim, based on the novel Henry Pierre Roche, directed by Francois Truffaut and starring Janine Moreau, is released. Mourinho. There's no end there. In 1965, musical variety program King Family Show featuring big band vocal group The King's Sisters premiered on ABC TV. This is an interesting one. In 1975, Barney Miller premieres on ABC TV. In 1977, Ministry's Roots premieres on ABC. And in 1983, TV series The A-Team with George Peppard and Mr. T premieres on NBC. And for the final thing on episode 7 of the Rock Out Wild Show, let's look at a few things in today in music. And there's a couple of them. Really, the ones I really want to go over are this one. 2016, Jimmy Bain, Scottish musician Jimmy Bain, passed away at the age of 68 while in his cabin of Def Leppard's Hysteria on the High Seas cruise. The cause of death was determined to be lung cancer. Bain was best known for playing bass guitar in the bands Rainbow and Ronnie James Dio. He also worked with Thin Lizzy, Boys Back in Town, the Thin Lizzy frontman, Phil Lynott, co-writing on his solo albums, as well as Ian Hunter, Gary Moore, and John Cale. 2014, 11 years ago, Justin Bieber was arrested after racing his yellow Lamborghini against another sports car on a Miami beach. Police say that singer did not cooperate when pulled over. Also charged him with resisting arrest without violence and having an expired driver's license. The 19-year-old singer was granted bail set at $2,500. And in 2006, Arctic Monkeys released their debut album, Whatever People Say I Am. That is what I'm not. The album received widespread critical acclaim from critics. It was named the best album of 2006 by Time Magazine, the Brit Awards for Best British Album, winning the 2007 Mercury Prize, and receiving a Grammy Award nomination for Best Alternative Music Album. And that was On This Day in Music. And that is the end of this episode of the Rock Out Wild Show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. An hour and 5. This is the longest episode I've ever done. I'm never doing this ever again. But you get the extra long mile with me, another extra half hour on this episode of the Rock Out Wild Show. This has been episode 7. And on a final note to all of you watching, get plenty of rest. And always do your best.